Today I will be talking about the painting High Tide by Dutch-Indonesian artist Jan Toorop. Extremely versatile in both style and technique, Toorop is considered one of the greatest artists in the Netherlands around the turn of the 20th century. Surprisingly, his work High Tide is linked to perhaps one of the National Gallery's most popular pictures, Vincent van Gogh's Sunflowers. But why do the colors and style of High Tide remind us so much of Van Gogh? High Tide was painted by Jan Toorop in 1891 and depicts a fisherman hauling his boat ashore during the high tide. We don't see his boat, as it is somewhere outside of the frame, but we can see the rope which the fisherman is attached to the bow. Dressed in a bright yellow raincoat and southwester, a word that actually comes from the Dutch word zuidwester, he struggles through the foaming current swirling around his thighs. He leans forward, pulling the boat ashore against the waves. Behind the fisherman, we can see 3 more boats battling the winds. The dark clouds in the background might be an indication of an incoming storm. In the upper left corner, contrasting with the gloomy grey, the calm evening sky has turned a beautiful shade of pink, reflecting in the rough green sea and foaming waves in the foreground. So far, we haven't been able to answer our interesting question. To do so, we need to consider the artist. What does Toorop have to do with the sunflowers? Jan Toorop was born in 1858 in Purworejo on the island of Java in what were then the Dutch East Indies. Toorop's father was Dutch and his mother was of Chinese, Indonesian and English heritage. At only 11 years old, Toorop left Java for the Netherlands for a better education. It would be the last time he ever saw his parents. He went on to study at the State Academy of Fine Arts in Amsterdam from 1881, but left the institute after only 2 years and enrolled at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Brussels. Participating in many exhibitions, Toorop was actively involved in the avant-garde circles and associated with Belgian artists such as Theo van Rijsselberghe and Fernand Knopf. It was also during this period that he met a young British woman, Annie Hall, who modeled for him. The pair married in 1886 and they settled in The Hague. Their daughter, Charlie Toorop, was born in 1891, the same year Jan painted High Tide. Charlie later followed in her father's footsteps and went on to become a gifted artist herself. After various marital crises, Toorop converted to Catholicism in 1905. With that, his distinct linear symbolism and Art Nouveau graphics became heavily intertwined with his own religious journey, focusing almost exclusively on devotional subject matter until his death in 1928. Toorop painted High Tide when he was living in Katwijk with Annie and their baby daughter Charlie. Katwijk is an old fishing village in the Netherlands on the North Sea, some 20 kilometers or 12 miles north of The Hague. Already in the early 20th century, Katwijk became increasingly popular as a summer destination, but in the time of Toorop, most of the fishing families from the close-knit Katwijk community were living in poverty. As the village didn't have a port like Rotterdam or The Hague, the fishermen had to drag the boats to shore at the end of a long day out on sea. This hauling of the boats was a recurring evening practice in many Dutch coastal fishing villages. The boats, so-called bomschuiten, had a flat bottom so they could easily glide ashore once they came onto the sand. The boats would stay on the beach during the night, and the fishermen hauled them back into the North Sea in the early mornings. As Toorop lived closely amongst the fishermen and women for almost 7 years, he would have seen the daily ritual many times. While living in Katwijk and The Hague, Toorop worked in a Neo-impressionist style, closely related to Georges Seurat's Pointillism. His paintings are characterized by small dots or strokes of unmixed color, as seen in Morning After the Strike, now in the Kröller-Müller Museum. Both in technique and subject matter, Morning reminds of Our Bathers at Asnières by Seurat, whose works Toorop saw in Paris and Brussels. Just like Seurat, Toorop's Neo-impressionist paintings often address a certain element of social injustice, like in Morning After the Strike, where Toorop refers to the impoverished mining communities in the Borinage, southern Belgium. This element is also present in the works from his period in Katwijk. While living on the coast, Toorop was interested in capturing the simplicity of daily life in the small villages and would often portray the fishermen and their families carrying out the heavy work involved with mending the nets and repairing the ships. In many of these pictures, their hardship was a key element to his characteristic Neo-impressionist style. Toorop's interest in portraying social inequality was sparked by the British textile designer and social activist William Morris, whose 1884 work Art and Socialism he had read while living in London. Toorop subsequently sketched many members of the poorer working classes hanging around the streets of London's industrial neighborhoods. Another artist who inspired Toorop to capture the city dwellers of London and the fishermen of Katwijk was his fellow Dutchman Vincent van Gogh. Especially during his earlier career in the south of the Netherlands and Flanders, Van Gogh painted many portraits of farmers and their families, such as in his famous The Potato Eaters. Although the two artists were of similar age and moved in similar circles, there is no account of them ever meeting. However, they did exhibit together in January 1890 at one of the exhibitions of the Brussels-based Le Vent group. The Ventistes were a collective of 20 Belgian artists, of which Toorop was the only Dutch member. Van Gogh had been invited to exhibit alongside Toorop and the other Ventistes, and although he didn't attend the exhibition personally, he did submit 6 works. 2 of the works in the selection were his now famous sunflowers. One was the sunflowers, which hangs here at the National Gallery, and the other is the sunflowers in the Neue Pinakothek in Munich. Toorop was very impressed with the 2 vases of yellow flowers and quickly recognized Van Gogh's unique approach to painting. It is possible that the recognizable yellow color of the sunflowers was an inspiration for Toorop when he painted his High Tide only a year after the Le Vent exhibition. Almost all his other works from the 1890s have purple and green as the predominant colors, but in High Tide he also incorporated a striking shade of yellow in the fisherman's hat and jacket as a focal point. The shades of green and purple are still visible in the foaming waves, but in the case of High Tide, the yellow shades in the very middle of the painting take center stage. Toorop also used a technique of pronounced brushstrokes, similar to the technique Van Gogh used in his dynamic portraits and landscapes. An example can be seen in the National Gallery's sunflowers, where the thick blotches of paint seem to take the shape of the sunflower seeds. The striking yellow color and pronounced use of paint in both works thus connect Jan Toorop's High Tide to Van Gogh's sunflowers. At the time of Van Gogh's tragic death in July 1890, his works were still very much unknown in his home country of the Netherlands. Apart from some progressive artists and critics, his works received very little recognition, and many collectors thought his colorful paintings were only a result of his poor mental health. However, Toorop was one of the few early admirers of Van Gogh's vibrant paintings, and thus decided to organize the first solo exhibition dedicated to the artist in the Netherlands. The exhibition was to be held at the newly founded Society of the Hague Art Circle and was to take place in May 1892, eventually extending into June. Toorop had the support of Van Gogh's sister-in-law, Johanna van Gogh-Bonger, who was the widow of the artist's recently deceased brother Theo. Johanna managed Vincent's estate and kept many of his works at her home in Bussum, the Netherlands. Toorop traveled from Katwijk to Bussum to visit Johanna, and together they selected 45 paintings and 44 drawings for the exhibition in The Hague. Amongst others, his selection contained 2 sunflower paintings, but unfortunately the 1892 catalogue does not specify which of Johanna's 5 sunflowers Toorop chose. Leading Van Gogh specialist Martin Bailey has identified one of them to be the sunflowers in the Neue Pinakothek, which Van Gogh had also included in his selection for the Le Vent exhibition in Brussels. It is possible that Toorop chose the National Gallery's sunflower as the second version, as he could have recognized the painting from their shared exhibition 2 years before. The sunflowers were amongst Johanna's most favorite paintings, and she only agreed to sell it to the National Gallery a year before her death in 1925. Despite Toorop's efforts to solidify Van Gogh as a genius of his time, the exhibition was received with a lukewarm response by the Dutch audience, and the larger parts of the works remained unsold. The exhibition did, however, lay the foundation for the ever-growing appreciation of the artist's works today. Where Van Gogh's works are amongst the most well-known around the world, Toorop still remains relatively unknown outside of his home country, which is why we are delighted to have such a significant work on loan to the National Gallery. Toorop was a real pioneer of Neo-impressionism in the Netherlands, and his captivating symbolist works and decorative Art Nouveau prints had a profound impact on the Dutch development of modern art. Today, we hang Toorop's High Tide near Van Gogh's paintings in the gallery, united by their striking yellow colors and extraordinary makers. If you're interested in learning more about art history, click here or here and subscribe to our channel. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.